Dr. James Boyes is Professor of International Politics at the American International University in London. Thanks for being with us again. When we look at this meeting that's underway, we're going to hear from both men later in a formal press conference, but what would you think is going to be key to those talks?
I think that what the President is trying to do is to set down a series of markers to make it as difficult as possible for the Brown administration to cut and run effectively out of Iraq. Quite clearly the British Prime Minister wants to get his British troops out there as quickly as possible. I think if he had his own way, he would have pulled the troops already. Quite clearly, I think what the American President is trying to do is to sort of try and strong-arm the British to keep, even if it's just a token force in Iraq, so that the Americans can say we've still got a coalition of the willing effectively, and to carry that forward into the new administration when that comes to power in January.
Well, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? In a way, we kind of look at Bush now as a spent force, but he has got, what, 7, 8 months left in office. How much leverage does he still have in those months, or are people starting to gradually sideline him? It's
important to remember that this president does not leave office in November when the election occurs, but on January 20th, 2009. And one can think back to the actions of his father. We think about the events in Somalia, for example, in the early 90s. It was his father who dispatched the troops to Somalia after he'd lost the election, but before he left office. So the power of the American president, despite the references to the lame duck, are still most powerful indeed.
And when it comes to the relationship between the two men, much made of that comparison between the Bush-Brown relationship and the Bush-Blair relationship. We know President Bush was meeting Blair this morning. How would you compare the dynamic there?
Well, it's very interesting to think about these two individuals. Quite clearly, when George Bush became American president, the British Prime Minister Tony Blair was almost certainly hoping for an Al Gore administration. He had to deal with George Bush. Now we see Gordon Brown very much trying to sort of figure out a way to deal with George Bush, and yet at the same time keep his options open for the incoming administration in January.
And in the meantime, we look particularly, as you say, at troop numbers. We're expecting to hear from Des Brown this afternoon about Afghanistan and the British commitment there. Would you imagine that that strong arming of Brown is going to work, considering the pressure that the Prime Minister is under back home? We've seen all the demonstrators out there talking about Iraq and Afghanistan.
Well, one wonders whether it's a coincidence that this announcement is going to be made this afternoon whilst the President is in town. I'm not a big believer in coincidences myself. I think it's almost certainly been arranged so that there will be some announcement which is relevant to the President's visit to town today.
So it can all be nicely tied up. Dr.
Absolutely.
James Boyes, thanks very much.
Thank you.